Alright, welcome back to another web development video where we look through the different components of web design and show you how to make some cool stuff. Today we're going to talk about media component. So you see this all the time where you see an image and then you see the writing out to the right of it. It's a very common application sort of pattern, but starting to see it more on the web too. Maybe on a profile page you see a person's photo next to their name. This is actually it's super common across many different types of elements. Today we're going to look at two. We're going to look at a profile, and then we're going to look at like a little media player and how we might do that with 2 or 3 sets of elements. And you can see that we're going to be using Flexbox. So if you don't know anything about Flexbox, I actually have some videos as an introduction or a primer to Flexbox, where you can learn the terminology and you can learn and not be lost. There's also a really good guide to Flexbox at css-tricks.com, which is a great website for you to get to know. They have all types of guides for Flexbox, and I use the guide for CSS Grid all the time. And so we'll just dive into the code here. The first thing that we're going to do is this little profile. And you can see I don't have any CSS really. It's just kind of evening things out a little bit here with the body and the H1 and the P tags, just getting rid of the margins so that we can actually just style everything. So I'll just focus on this up here. We have a section called profile. We can actually make that a section, a proper HTML5 section. Inside that we have an inner, which kind of just wraps the whole image and text divs. And so the profile image is actually a div that's wrapping the actual image. This gives us a block level. Element, so that this goes. You can see this goes all the way across. If it were just the image, also I believe that's a block level element, but I like the control of being able to control the image apart from a wrapper of some sort. So you can make this a little bit more semantic, maybe by adding an article, or this could actually be a section, and then the profile text could be an article. Different ways for you to do those things to make it a little bit more semantic. This doesn't have any semantic use, so it's not really, I wouldn't give it any sort of section. I would just leave it as a div. And then we have here our profile text, which we've collected just the name and then a little profile, like short basic bio profile. So that's our profile text. Now what we want to do is we want to bring this information, we want to bring it up like this, right? And move it next to that. So what we want to do is come down, and we will, this is part of the reason I do a profile inner, is so that I can also determine the max width and things like that. That way we have one, or if you want to put a background on profile, and you want that background to extend all the way across the page, and then you want all of this stuff to have a maximum width, you're going to need an inside div. So I tend to build section components like that with a profile inner, or some sort of whatever the section is dash inner. That way I can make sure I have something to be able to move all of this content here. I can move it all together across the page, or determine what its maximum width might be. So let's just go ahead and make these things, make this come up here like this. And the first way that we do that is we take our profile inner and we're going to add a display flex. Now what this does is we have 2 sections, right? We have a section and an article, and what it's going to do is it's going to take this and it's going to move it right up here next to it. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. So we come down here and we say profile inner display flex, and you can see here that we've put those things side by side. Now they're just kind of there side by side. It's still very responsive, but they are tagged to the top left. Now what I want to do is I want to center that, and I'll use something like 600 pixels, I guess. 600 seems fine. 500, 600. Essentially, once you get off the phone or a tablet, you know it's going to be centered in the middle. So the way that we do that is we say the maximum width is 600 pixels, and then we need to make a margin auto. You can also do 0 in auto, which might actually be better for older browsers. But what is important is that you have it automatic on both sides. So as this goes, it's automatically making this space match this space. So we can't see it right now because we just have white as a background here, and we just have a transparent background. So we can change that by going to here, and we can add to our profile inner a background color of just something light that we can see. So now you can see how it's centered on the page. So this space over here is always going to equal this space over here. So it keeps everything centered in the middle. One little tricky thing, you can see the space here. If you don't know how to get rid of that, you can just say image, and you can just say display block, and then you see how that gets rid of that there. Let's show that. So there's a little bit of space right there, and this happens with most of your images, if not all of them. And if you just give it a display block and an express display block, then it gets rid of that little image there. That way you're not working with you know, some sort of weird 5 pixel padding somewhere, and you can't figure out why things don't quite line up or whatever, or why, if you want this look where it butts up right up against the color, then you're going to need to get rid of that. Otherwise it's always going to be there. So we have our media element here. It's looking pretty good actually right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of padding just to get it off of the gray area. So you can see it kind of gets everything away from the edge. That wasn't the look I was going for. And I really want this to be a circle, and so I would say profile image, and then the image, and then we say border radius of 50%. Now border radius of 50% will give you an oval or a circle depending on, so this is 75 by 75 pixels. So as long as it's square, it's going to give you a perfectly square or a perfect circle. If this were 175 tall, you can see that it gives us an oval shape, right? So it does give a circle shape or an oval shape depending on whether it's a square or a rectangle. I also want to give a little bit of margin right here. So I don't want those things to be right up next to each other. So I'm just going to say the margin to the right of the profile image is going to be one rem, so 16 pixels essentially. And what else do I want to do? I want these to be, you see how they're aligning to the top? That's the normal Flexbox style, to align the items to the top edge or to the left edge. So that's the default. And what I want is to be able to come up here to my display flex, and I want it to align, since the flexed axis is the X, we have not changed it. So by default the X axis is the flex axis. So I'm going to say align items, which controls the vertical axis is going to be center. So you could also do flex end if you wanted everything to be aligned to the bottom. But we want ours to be centered, and so now these two elements are lined up together. What else? It's pretty good right now. We have our media element here. You can see that it's responsive. So as it gets smaller, it's responsive. And I think that's all that we really need for that. If you wanted to create multiples of these, you would just copy and paste those down. Oh. So then you would have multiples of the same media element. You could change out the images and you could change out the text, and then you would have multiple elements. In order to get those away from one another, we would say margin, let's say half a rem on the top and then 0 on the edges. Oh, we would say auto, I'm sorry, and then we had to just get rid of this. So let me try that again. Since we already have a margin called, we should just use that one. So instead of 0 on top and bottom, we could just say 0.5. And then that keeps it centered in the page, but it gives us a little bit of vertical spacing there to space out our elements. So this is a pretty cool way of doing it. And let's move on to the second example. The second example is like a little media player. You see this a lot with if you try to make a media player, or you try to make a little song player or a song list, you might see this pattern. So let's just take this and here we go. And then we'll say sorry, I didn't set this up very well. And then we'll say section is media player. Okay, so now we have our media player here. Let's go ahead and hide this whole section. And so we have our media player here, and what our media player has is, again, we have a media inner so that we can control all of this content on the page, so everything here. And we have a media image that's here. We have our media text, which is the H1 and then the name of the album. So this is band and the album. You could switch those around where, you know, you have the album name and the band underneath. And then the media controls. So essentially, if you're building out an actual media player using JavaScript or the HTML5 audio, then you would just have your controls here that you're able to set or change or whatever you need to do. In this example, we're not going to make a real working example of this. This is just going to be the front end HTML and CSS and just, you know, what it would look like. So if you notice, in these elements up here, we only had 2 things to worry about when we're flexing. In this one, we're actually going to have 3. So we have the media image, we have the media text, and we have the media controls. And those are going to be all the elements that we have to flex. And we're going to talk about how to control those elements as the viewport width grows and shrinks. Okay. So let's come down here, and some of our styles are just going to be the same. So we can actually take well, these things are already the same, so let's just start all the way over. So we're going to say mostly with the media inner is what we're going to be working with, and then we'll say the background, again, background color is a little bit darker this time. So you can see how we have The media inner, it covers the full width of the page just like the media player element. So let's set a max width there to 600 pixels, and same thing, margin of auto is fine. Okay, we still want to create some padding there, so let's add that in again. And so now we have a little bit of padding, and what we want to do is we want to move all these elements in line with one another. And the way, since our media inner element is the one containing all the elements we want to flex, then we just add display flex, and it flexes all of our elements. Again, the default is top and left, so that's where everything is being flowed to. You can see it's all flowed that way. There are a couple different ways to go about spacing this out. An easy way would be to say justify content space between. Now what this does is it puts the first element on the left edge, it puts the last element on the right edge, and then it redistributes all of the elements evenly in between. So this is not exactly what we want, but that would be what you would want if you wanted all three elements to have the same space in between. We could do space around, which is a similar concept, but it doesn't put the first and last elements to the edges. It gives the same amount of space around every single element, including the first and last. We could do flex in, which pushes everything to the end. Also, not what we want to do. And then finally we could center everything. And then we could just control by element, like this one here. We could put a margin or a padding on this element and push those elements out to the right so that they stay centered. Also, not what we're looking for. So we need a new way to control these different elements, and I also want to make sure that they're aligned just like the others. So we align the items to the center. That way all three items are aligned to the center, and since this is the biggest item, it's going to be aligned to the center of the largest item. So you can see this is the smallest one, but it's aligned to the center of this larger item. It always works like that. Whatever the largest element is, it's going to align it to the center of that. Okay, so we have a little work to do here, and what we want to do is we want to take our I want to work off the media text. So normally when I have three elements like this and I need to create some space, I usually work off of the middle one, right? So let's say, just as an example, we bring these back, and let's say we only have three. Sorry, this is a little bit of an aside, but it's kind of one of those things that I find to be interesting and helpful in a lot of different ways. So let's say we have three elements here. Let's take this one away. We have three elements here, and what we want to do is put a little space. We want to not put space here, and we want to not put space here, but we do want space on the inside. So one of the ways that we can do that is we can take this second element and we can give it margin on the top and bottom, and then we don't have to go through and do like pseudo elements or anything like that for the first and the third element. So the way that we do that with SAS is we go to our profile inner, and then we say essentially profile inner, and then we want to use the nth child selector. Now the nth child says that all of the profile inners are indexed, so 1, 2, 3. And then we want the second one, so we would say nth child, and then inside you do 2, and then we would say margin, and on the top we want point, actually let's do 1 rem, and then on the sides we want auto actually. So you can see that just by controlling this one element, we've been able to keep no space on the top and there's no space on the bottom. but we actually have created that internal space. Now this is something you can do with CSS Grid once you learn CSS Grid, but this is a way to do a backup if you're doing the CSS fallback. CSS Grid, when you do the grid gap, it only controls the internal gaps between your different elements. It does not control the external spacing. So that's one good way to do it. You could also do, since it's a number 2, you could do even, and you come out with the same thing because this is number 2. That's the only even number. And if you were to do another one, then it would also create space. But the problem is, if you do another one, then we've actually got, well, no problem there, right? So there's no space down here. So that's another way to do it, is just every other one you create some space there. So hopefully that's clear to you. If you don't understand, maybe I can show you in another video some more examples of what that might be. But essentially, when you have 3 elements and you want to control the spacing between them, you really only have to control the spacing between the middle element. So let's jump back to what we were doing with our media player. So we're going to use that concept down here, and we're going to say we're going to focus on this middle element. Now that middle element is the media text. Okay, so let's focus on the media text. And in Flexbox we have something called Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. Now Flex Grow and Flex Shrink says when this element is here and it's flexed, it's going to grow and take up as much space as we tell it to take up. And if Flex Shrink says it's going to take up less space than what we need. So it's going to shrink down to a certain size. And Flex Grow says it can grow up to a certain size. So we want this element to grow because we want this element to get bigger. We want it to take up more space, essentially. And I believe the appropriate way would be to do, we want it to be 2. So essentially what this is saying is Flex Grow, we want this to grow and take up 2 parts for every 1 part of these. Okay, so it breaks it up essentially as into like a 1/3, 2/3 type of scenario, where we have 1/3 of the space here, we have 2/3 of the space here, and then we have 1/3 of the space here. So it's going to grow and take up as much space as it needs to take up, as long as it's taking up 2/3 of the space, since we have 3 items. And then you can see that we have, if we do the background to be red, you can see that it's taking up the fullness of that space. Okay. If for some reason we wanted the media image to Flex Grow to 2, now these 2 are taking up an equal amount of space, and this one is only taking up 1 part. So each of these is taking up 2, and this is taking up 1 part. If you only had 2 elements and you did Flex Grow 2 for each of them, they would each take up half, since there's 2 of them. I hope that makes sense to you. It's a little strange getting used to Flex Grow and Flex Shrink. There's a shorthand for writing this as well, but it's already confusing enough, so we'll just go with what it is for right now. So this is going to be Flex Grow 2, and then I think I want to just put that same margin to the right. Sorry. on our media image, I just want to do that same margin to the right of 1 rem. And then really this is the layout that we have. I'm going to get a little bit picky down here and do the media player, or the media play button. And I'm going to say font size of like 3 rem. So it's going to be a little bit bigger, and then maybe a margin to the right of 1 rem. Whenever this starts shrinking and growing, you'll see that if I don't have that, it gets a little bit close to the edge over here. Yeah, that's a little tight for my thinking whenever there's you're having to use your finger to touch it. But you can see how it grows. So this stays to the right, this stays to the left, and then the part that's growing and shrinking is in here, and it's allowed to take up that amount of space. You see that? So we're down at like 320 pixels, and this will be an iPhone 5, so a pretty small phone size. And then, you know, as you get up here, you know, this is more like a regular phone size that you would see. So that's how you can create a media element where you'd have a play button, but this is how you would control like 3 elements. And one of the reasons that we put the flex grow on this one is because what if you had a super long name, right? So what if it was pretty long and you want to be able, you want to be able to allow that name to be in there. And so you can see that that name is going to actually shrink up, but it's going to give it enough space to actually be in there. Okay, and you can deal with this space by putting some padding on this, or putting some padding on this. You can deal with that space and make sure that you don't run into this sort of thing. But that's why we put it here, because this element is essentially going to stay the same size. This one's going to stay the same size, and this is the part that we really need to be responsive and to flex. So we put the flex grow. We want to give it as much room as it needs in order to lay out the text. Hopefully that is not too confusing for you. Let me open up the other. So what we did today is we went over how to create different media components. And we created a media player component, and we also created just something like a profile type of component. You could put this anywhere on the page in this little construct, and it would go wherever you need it to go. I'm looking at my email right now, and my email, it shows a media style component here, right? So you see that's something from Microsoft, and that was a style that they've gone with. You see it everywhere. It's a pattern you see all the time. So hopefully this is helpful to you. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down in the comments below, and I try to get to those as soon as they happen, if not within a day or two. Again, if you have any questions about Flexbox itself and understanding a little bit more about Flexbox, I have a playlist that I'll put into the description of the video, and you can go and learn more about Flexbox. Alright, well, that was a good video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.